But that leads to a question for both of you. But actually, Mark, you were in shipping before you were in media. And one thing we've heard, and I think this is implicit, a little bit of concern with Bridge, but I don't think it's pertaining to him. I think he's just sort of stating or implying what a lot of us are thinking. And you see this in some of the things Michael Anton over at State Policy Planning has said, which is just pointing out the vulnerability of our aircraft carriers, the idea that that'll prevent that, one or two or surging three carriers, or how you would deter or handle a Chinese attack. Steve, as you mentioned, the attack would probably be very different than that. It would be hybrid in nature. But I think there's this undertone that the balance of power has shifted so much that, of course, we're never going to say publicly that we're going to give up Taiwan, or that we'll have no ability to undo a Chinese blockade. But the reality is that the line of defense runs from our treaty allies, Japan, through the Philippines, and through Southeast Asia, and that we are, in fact, prepared to lose Taiwan. But Mark, I think you pointed out, just based on your knowledge of shipping, and in addition to politics and national security, that would be pretty untenable for the United States in East Asia. Is that right? And why do you think it is?
Well, I mean, look, I'll go back to this years and years ago, about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I heard this story about it. There's a dinner in Canberra, and the Australians were down there, and the military attachés are there. And the Chinese, one of the junior Chinese military attachés, maybe had a little bit much to drink, but he was telling the Australians, don't worry, when you go over the South China Sea, which is our lake, we'll let you fly over for very good overflight rights. Well, we won't charge you that much. And half the Australians in the room thought it was a good deal, and the other half were like, who the hell are you talking to? And I do believe that if they take Taiwan, that will be their lake. And now we're seeing a new map, and that map now has Palawan. Look, China is, to me, a declining power, but it's not growing. It's losing people. I think the workforce decline, I know people are dying, but also people live longer, but the workforce decline is much more serious than what we're talking about. In other words, the number of people, the birth rates have been dropping consistently, but in the next, I'd say by 2030, once we get to 2030, I mean, we're going to start seeing 45 million people a year leave the workforce. Not going to die, but they're going to be leaving the workforce. And it's going to be huge. The inflationary pressures are going to be, in other words, they're going to have a mess. But that doesn't mean they're not going to have a military appetite, and it's not going to have an expansionist appetite. I firmly believe that I know the Filipinos believe this, and I know the Indonesians are starting to believe this. The Chinese have this racial superiority thing, the Han Chinese. You talk to these young Chinese guys who come out of Beijing, or even on some U.S. campuses, and they're not going to get their ass kicked by running their mouth too much, but they firmly believe. I've got a bit of an undercover son because my son's Chinese, and he and some of his friends listen to these guys, and these guys actually think that oh, the Filipinos will do what we tell them to do. Oh, they'll do this. Oh, they'll do that. I hate to say it, it's kind of like some of the extreme MAGA guys you get who are on the internet, and they're going oh, we'll take Canada in 3 days. Oh, yeah, we're going to, in other words, we're going to go over and start murdering people in Ontario to take land. I don't think so. But the thing is that I do believe that the Japanese, this is why the Japanese can't have it. I remember I was talking to, and since you said, I was talking to a very senior former diplomat, Reagan guy, and he was telling me it's no big deal if they go around Taiwan. In other words, he said, Mark, if shipping leaves to Japan, it has to go an extra 3 days. That's not much. And I was just looking at him going yeah, but what about all the stuff that comes up through there? Oh, don't worry. The Filipinos will just go. Everybody just goes around it. It's that's dream world. That's dream world. That's why I do not see the Japanese sitting there. I don't think the Koreans do anything because they got the land border, and they're the Koreans. You know what I'm saying? They would take them away. But I really do believe that the Japanese are not going to sit. And I will tell you the other group that I think. You want to arm them up, but you want to be careful as the Filipinos. I do think I do think if you give the Filipinos control of some HIMAR batteries down there, they're going to start popping those merchant ships off in about 5 seconds. It'd be like giving your 12-year-old a cannon, and he starts shooting squirrels with it. That's what the Filipinos will be like down there. The ethnic tensions between the Chinese community and the native Filipinos is growing. I think there's probably net negative migration out of the Philippines now because of that. They're certainly not coming anymore. But I firmly believe, and I'll defer to Steve on this, but I firmly believe the Japanese fight, because I just don't see, we have this belief, like Steve, I think is 100% right. I think the Chinese ships go out and sail out, and I think those systems fail in a half an hour. I just give you one analogy here. I was talking to a guy who works as a ship, and when they're building ships, you send in these guys from SGS or Veritas, and as they're building the ship, you make sure the yard follows the specifications. He's in a yard where they're building his ships. He's their ship, and he walks over, and they're building these Chinese destroyers, and he said he would have rejected every single weld, every single crossbrace, every single everything. He said, if this thing hits 10-foot waves, it's cracking. And he said he saw at least 4 or 5 hulls like that. But he's very careful not saying anything because I don't want to be accused of espionage. But he's out now. He's retired now. No, he's working in California now. But the fact of the matter is, it is that their equipment is that bad. And you hear these stories all over the place. And in the Philippines, they gave the Filipinos Chinese machine guns, personal assault weapons. And the Filipino army didn't want them because they were so bad. So Duterte had them turned over to the police department. And within about a year, they were none of them were working anymore. They were literally being carried around by, the local guard, the local security guards, which they buy them third hand. So anyway, but I defer to you and Steve because you guys understand it. I mean, I'm not a China expert because China's just too big of a subject for me. But when you sit there and you look at it and you talk to people and you go, the Japanese, or if the Chinese do something in the South China Sea, I don't think the Japanese will do too much. They'll offer some support. But I think if they come after Taiwan, I don't see how the Japanese sit. And I think they're making it as such. And Steve's right. I think Steve's 100% right. You wake that Japanese giant. My old, guys all know my boss, Jimmy. Jimmy's convinced that Abe changed before he went to jail. Jimmy was convinced that Abe changed Japan. He was convinced of it. He said just the feel of the whole country after Abe, he revitalized.
Well, Mark, I think that one of the things you were talking about is profoundly unknown and completely unappreciated among most of our global strategist clique, and that's the ethnic issues. Because we've only had one conversation about race in the world, and it's usually American bad or white man bad, but really this tension in Asia. So you have an aggressive CCP. The CCP plays the race card against a lot of people in the world, especially in Europe and especially in the United States and Canada. But there's this undercurrent of resentment in its near abroad is very palpable, and it's a very powerful force. And it is a limit on what people would call the soft power, because you have these arrogant people that ride their Ferraris around town, and take advantage of local who knows what. And they have this air of superiority about them. It goes down really, really badly. And so where they might have their way in Australia, where people wilt in the accusation of, you're just anti-Chinese, in Japan and the Philippines and Taiwan even to a degree, the ethnic card doesn't work the same way. But it is, and in some ways it wouldn't even be fair to call it ethnic. It's really attitudinal. It's like people of a big, nasty, snobby fraternity that that the neighbors really have just grown to resent and borderline hate, and it's because of the way they act.
Steve, I think that's such an important point, but I also think it's run. I think it's run its course here too.
I hope so.
You know, it works. It works in their little world. You know, I mean, I'm working where I worked at, and when you show up, you know, sometimes we'd have people be there, and it was just so classic. And you guys were around Jimmy's dinner table, but imagine, you know, all of a sudden, you know, we have the professors or the lefties visiting from someplace show up, and Jimmy, the boss, we're talking about the Chinese, and they're like, oh well, you know, we have to respect their culture, and like you get our senior guys, they were like, F them, you know, the Hong Kong people had no patience for that. In fact, you know, it was an internet meme of catching mainland guys behaving badly. Now, it's kind of, and you're exactly right. Like if we just saw, we had 3 Chinese American soldiers arrested here in big news now for spying up in Washington, state of Washington. They just busted 3 guys there from the Army selling secrets back to China. And what I didn't see, and I looked, is you didn't see, even on the lefty sites, you didn't see we have to make sure we have to stop Asian hate and those things. And the only people putting stop Asian hate signs are the people who have 5 other signs in their lawn. You know what I'm saying? In other words, why, you know, my favorite response to stop Asian hate is, I live in Asia. They hate each other. It is completely, you know, it's like there's that line about, there's that comedian, the big Fluffy, and he does his things about the Colombians hate the Cubans hate the Mexicans hate everybody, you know, and it's all the way through. And that's pretty much, that's a very good point, Steve. And it's something that if you brought up, I think 4 years ago, I think now about half the room would still gasp, but most people would be like, yeah, we're not playing that game anymore. You're not going to play that game. The people who really play that game are still the apologists. I saw it played, I guess it was about a month ago. 2 months ago, I was watching something from the Asia Society, and somebody brought it up, and the other person, the white person there, tried to play it. I'm not sure it played well.
Yeah. Well, part of it does seem, I guess, to other Asians like the greater East Asia co-prosperity fear, where Imperial Japan was saying, yes, we're going to kick out the European imperialists, and we're doing this on behalf of Asians. And then it turns out they're treating other Asians absolutely horrendously. But 2 thoughts came to mind. First, Mark, when you mentioned with Filipinos and giving a 12 gauge to a 12-year-old, which I loved in the State of the Union, the non-State of the Union address, when they gave, was it a 13-year-old kid, the cancer survivor, and they gave him a badge to make him an honorary member of the Secret Service. The Democrats just sat on their hands during that. Wouldn't it have been awesome if he also gave the kid a service pistol, if he handed him, you know, a 6-hour 9mm or whatever the Secret Service is using today, you know, unloaded it all. But, you know, here's your badge, and here's your service pistol. I mean, imagine how awesome.
Hey, I got one question for Steve. Steve, I wanted to ask you your take on the Panama Canal sale. What's your take on that? How does that play for Trump? I mean, you see that as a real win for him, or what do you see, and the implications for China?
I think that there's still several acts in the Panama play to unfurl. First it was a big deal for that to be the first stop for a brand new Secretary of State. Who would have thunk that? And then to have that Secretary of State be a Marco Rubio who has some identity with the issues in the Western Hemisphere, but also branding on countering China's influence. And to have a takeaway from that visit, a commitment to actually exit the Belt and Road, not just say we don't like it, but actually go through the formalities of exiting the Belt and Road. I think that was kind of a really important planting of the flag that America is going to be present at a choke point in the North-South America corridor. It's a choke point on the migration flow also. And then when you're talking about running the ports, I am far too ignorant to understand how ports are run. It literally blows my mind how eagles' beaks and cow hooves and whatever else you can order on Amazon can go into a container and sort of plop show up on your doorstep in 2 days or less. And they somehow went into this morass of millions of containers, probably on jets for those fast moving shipments. But still, it just blows my mind that anybody's crap gets anywhere in this morass of containers. And Hong Kong, of course, is one of the bigger, busier ports in the world. But the Panama Canal throughput is huge. And I thought that at least symbolically and maybe substantively, it was a big win to call the bluff on, is a Hong Kong-based company independent or Chinese? To me, this is the first
this is CK Hutchison,
major,
right?
I think, global business news item where that was unequivocally answered. It's Chinese. And who did that? It was Beijing with the national security law. If you go before the national security law, there might have been enough gray zone activity. And I have friends that will go say, oh, this is a storied company, goes back generations, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, fine. But since the national security law, it's binary. And if you are legal and you operate there, you're Chinese. And you're not just ethnically Chinese, you're commie Chinese. And is BlackRock better? I mean, they're probably tied in with a lot of things that might make people scratch their heads too. But it at least moved off the nickel that a Hong Kong company operating in good standing with the government of China is going to be the owner operator of the major port facilities there. Now, I don't know who BlackRock gets to operate these things. BlackRock is a financer.
Oh, the personnel won't change much at all, but the Chinese personnel will leave.
So I see this as a move generally in the right direction. I think it has to be sustained by the United States. I mean, I've spent some time this week in Argentina where there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of work that needs to be done to take advantage of that opportunity. But for most of my career, there's been a building brief in our government to warn about malign influences by China and to say, say no to Huawei and your sensitive comms and don't buy weapons platforms from China. I mean, even here in Argentina, there was a serious bid for Chinese fighter jets to be sold to Argentina. And they wanted F-16s, and they ended up getting the F-16s. But it was a serious competition. And who'd have thunk in our hemisphere, Chinese flying crap would be what people wanted to buy. But America's going to have to come in with our allies. Maybe those allies are where Christian is now in the United Arab Emirates, where they can afford to finance things. Maybe it's Japan taking a new look. They can't be present everywhere, but they can finance some things where you're looking at rare earths, you're looking at communication systems. And this Panama move is a part of that broader narrative. Is the United States and the responsible stakeholder West going to do something differently in this hemisphere? And if we do, I think the payoffs are enormous. And the safe shoring of supply chains become real. The immigration issues become very, very different. Food security, energy security, access to rare earths and other vital minerals. There's a lot we solve. We're a long way from it today, but these are just the incremental moves that haven't happened for 20 years of talk about, hey, watch out for China.
Right. And it's a lot of pressure going on Xi Jinping. And the 20% tariffs, which are just a start, the sort of political failures, what speaking here in the UAE with a Russian expert who focuses a lot on China, the continued purges in the rocket force in the PLA, the purges in the PLAN, China's Navy. There's something stirring there. And there's a lot of tension in that system. And Trump, I think is going to do a lot to dial that up. And we're also sort of catching other currents. Yeah, the problems in Taiwan with the LY cutting the defense budget at the same time the president wants to increase it, but trends in the Philippines and Japan and elsewhere in the region that seem to be going our way. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this episode of Domino Theory. Thank you, Steve Yates, as always, with great expertise on politics and everything from Washington to Asia and also in South America. Thank you to Mark Simon. We'll be back again with another episode soon.